Picture this. You're settling into your seat on a massive Boeing 777. The engines spool up, roaring to life, and you feel that familiar pushback into your seat as hundreds of tons of metal hurtle down the runway. Up front, sitting in the left seat, is the captain. They're the absolute ultimate authority on that airplane. You trust them with your life, right? You just naturally assume they've got every possible credential required to fly you safely across the ocean. But what if the person commanding that multi-million-dollar machine was hiding a monumental secret? What if they'd been operating in the shadows of a massive deception, literally for decades? At first, everything seemed totally normal, but what investigators eventually uncovered would completely challenge everything we thought we knew about safety, trust, and those invisible systems meant to protect us up in the sky. Okay, let's dive right into this.
Welcome back to Air Flight Space, where we explore aviation stories, air safety investigations, industry developments, and the real-world lessons shaping modern flight. Modern aviation is often called the most heavily regulated industry on Earth. There are checks, double checks, and triple checks for literally everything, from a loose screw to the exact pound of fuel loaded on board. So how on earth does a human being completely bypass the strict checks of the most regulated industry on the planet? How does a pilot rise up to the prestigious rank of captain on a flagship wide-body jet and fly for an entire career without holding the mandatory license to do so? To really wrap our heads around how this happened, we're building on our previous investigation into the incredible case of Jeffrey Wall. If you haven't watched part 1 of this story yet, I highly recommend checking out the link to that explainer. In that investigation, we detailed how the facade finally shattered on June 1st, 2026, when Peel Regional Police knocked on the door of the recently retired Air Canada captain, and they weren't there to ask him about some minor paperwork mix-up. He was placed under arrest, sending absolute shockwaves through the Canadian aviation community and instantly raising massive red flags across the global aerospace industry.
The stakes were incredibly high here, and the allegations laid out in the criminal indictment, they were severe. Here is why this matters. We're looking at charges of fraud, 2 counts of uttering forged documents, 3 counts of possession of counterfeit marks, and public mischief. We're not talking about a pilot simply forgetting to renew a piece of paper in the mail. These severe charges allege an active, intentional, and sustained effort to deceive Transport Canada and Air Canada. In an industry literally built on a foundation of absolute trust and verifiable truth, these charges represent the ultimate breach of faith.
All right, let's move into Section 1, Anatomy of the Deception, Hiding in Plain Sight.
To truly grasp the magnitude of this deception, we have to unpack how Wall managed to successfully bypass the administrative safeguards of a major legacy carrier for nearly 3 decades. Just look at the timeline of this impossible fraud. It's wild. Wall was hired by Air Canada back in 1998. Between 2009 and his retirement in 2025, he piloted over 900 domestic and international flights. Just think about the sheer scale of that for a second. To put that into perspective, that is thousands upon thousands of passengers flown over a 27-year career. It wasn't until January 2026, after he had actually already hung up his wings for good, that the national regulator, Transport Canada, opened a review into his credentials. Fast forward 5 months later to June 2026, and he's arrested. He was literally able to hide his true licensing status across an entire career before the facade finally shattered. You might be wondering, why did no one else notice anything unusual for 27 years? Well, investigators noticed something really crucial here. A big part of the reason he was able to hide in plain sight was his incredibly prestigious resume. It created what we can call a halo effect. He was a former helicopter pilot for the Royal Canadian Air Force, but perhaps the most shocking detail of the whole shebang, he actually chaired the Master Executive Council of the Air Canada Pilots Association. He was a recognized union leader among his peers, directly tasked with representing the professional standards of his fellow pilots. This impeccable pedigree almost certainly deflected all suspicion. I mean, who would ever suspect a decorated military veteran and top union official of faking his own credentials? No way, right? Section 2. The Missing License. Navigating Aviation Bureaucracy. So, what was the exact technical reality of the forgery, and what specific documents sparked this massive investigation? Well, Wall wasn't a total imposter who just wandered in off the street. The reality is much more nuanced than that. It all hinges on the strict, tiered licensing system that governs our skies. Wall actually legally held a commercial pilot license, or CPL. That's a legitimate hard-earned certification that lets you fly for hire, usually acting as a co-pilot or first officer. But he did not hold an air transport pilot license, the ATPL.
To put it simply, the ATPL is essentially the PhD of aviation licensing. It requires a massive number of logged flight hours, usually a minimum of 1,500, along with really rigorous written exams covering advanced aerodynamics, complex meteorology, and intricate aircraft systems. You can definitely be a first officer with a standard commercial license, but to sit in the left seat and command a Boeing 770, the ATPL is a strict, non-negotiable legal requirement. Authorities allege he used fraudulent documents to convince the airline he actually had one. Moving on to Section 3, the safety paradox. Why weren't passengers in danger? This brings us to a really fascinating, kind of counterintuitive twist in this whole mystery. We've got a pilot flying illegally for 27 years. Naturally, your immediate thought as a passenger would be, oh my gosh, I was in danger. But following the arrest, Air Canada came out with a very firm, objective, and honestly pretty surprising stance. They stated flatly that safety was not compromised. How can an airline confidently assert that a man faking his ultimate credential didn't put passengers at risk? Keep this detail in mind because this brilliantly illustrates how modern flight safety operates. It all comes down to what's known as the Swiss cheese model. This is an aviation safety framework where you have multiple layers of defense: training, technology, regulation, licensing. But each layer has little holes in it, just like Swiss cheese. Accidents only happen if the holes across every single layer align perfectly. This model perfectly explains how an administrative failure was completely prevented from becoming a fatal disaster. Let's look at the specific layers of defense in the Wall case to see how this works. The administrative licensing layer completely failed due to the allegedly forged ATPL. That's a hole in the cheese. But the other layers, they held firm. Even though Wall allegedly faked that initial piece of paper, he couldn't fake his actual hands-on flying skills. Every 6 to 12 months, airline pilots have to step into highly advanced full-motion simulators where they are thrown every emergency in the book. We're talking engine failures, severe weather, total hydraulic loss. Air Canada pointed out that Wall successfully passed this recurrent training every single time. His practical ability to fly the plane and manage a complex multi-crew cockpit environment was completely real. It was verified continuously, catching what the paperwork missed. Section 4. Closing the loophole, the regulatory fallout. So, the absolutely crucial point here is this: practical flying ability does not excuse breaking the law. In aviation, the paperwork is just as critical as the piloting itself, because the entire system relies on standardized compliance. Let's examine the sweeping regulatory hammer that followed. Before the criminal courts even had their say, Transport Canada stepped right in. They issued a massive monetary penalty amounting to $67,500. And this fine wasn't just a little slap on the wrist. It was specifically issued for multiple instances of exercising the privileges of a crew license that he simply did not hold. This is a stark reminder that regulatory bodies have immense power to financially punish noncompliance, and that's completely separate from whatever criminal penalties might come down from the local police. And Transport Canada didn't just stop there. On June 12, 2026, they issued an urgent civil aviation safety alert to the entire industry. It demanded that airlines exercise heightened diligence in verifying the validity, authenticity, and currency of pilot licenses at all stages of employment. Any discrepancies, irregularities, or anomalies, no matter how minor, must be treated seriously. The national regulator was demanding that all airlines thoroughly re-verify flight crew credentials directly against Transport Canada's own records. No more taking things at face value. To their credit, once this anomaly was discovered, Air Canada went into immediate damage control. Step 1, they voluntarily reported the matter directly to the regulators, ensuring full transparency. Step 2, they instantly initiated a massive fleet-wide audit of their entire pilot group, thankfully finding 0 other instances. Wall was a complete lone wolf here. And Step 3, they overhauled their administrative processes to mandate strict physical verification of original Transport Canada documents. This became a key lesson for investigators and the whole industry, ensuring that a simple photocopy or a clever digital forgery could never, ever trick their multi-layered safety system again. So, what can we really learn from this story? Jeffrey Wall was an expert pilot, a union leader, and a military veteran. Yes, his practical flying skills absolutely kept his passengers safe, but his 27-year deception exposed a startling vulnerability in the bureaucracy of the skies. It forces us all to ask a highly provocative question. If a decorated captain bypassed aviation's foundational paperwork for nearly 3 decades, how many other critical safety layers in our world rely entirely on blind trust? It's a massive question, and one that airlines and regulators are going to be wrestling with long after the final gavel falls on this unprecedented aviation mystery.
Thanks for watching Airflight Space. If you found this investigation informative, leave a like and subscribe for more aviation explainers and air safety documentaries. Share your thoughts below, and I'll see you in the next one.